Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar for our My Education, My Future campaign that is being hosted by Digital. Digital is a social enterprise that's been in operation in North Lebanon for a year and a half. Our main mission is to bring remote work to young people across Lebanon because of the high unemployment rate. But in addition to that, we strive also to support our communities in CSR efforts. And that is why this week we have launched our My Education, My Future campaign to support young school children in Lebanon get back to the schooling. Today we have with us Rasha Bisar, who is a member of the Social and People with Disabilities Committee at the Municipality of Tripoli in North Lebanon. And we also have Michelle Katra, who is the school director at the National Orthodox School in Mina, also in North Lebanon. Today, we're here to talk a bit more about the situation of school children in Lebanon and what they're being faced with on a daily basis as schools are getting back into are opening again in Lebanon. So before we start, I just want to give everybody some idea of statistics of what's happening in Lebanon with children and families in general. So we know from Save the Children that since the pandemic started, 1.2 million children in Lebanon have been out of school. For reference, there's only 1.7 million children aged 0 to 14 in Lebanon. So the vast majority have not been in school since the pandemic started. Over the past year, because of the pandemic, children have received a maximum of 11 weeks of education. Now, with our economic crisis, gasoline crisis, electricity crisis, etc., 15% of families in Lebanon have stopped sending their children to school, often because of financial burdens. Over the last year, our local currency, the Lebanese lira, has lost 88% of its value. And that has pushed 82% of the population of the country into multidimensional poverty. In 2019, the rate of poverty, multidimensional poverty, was just 42. So you just see it doubled over 1 year because of the economic crisis. So, and children are really paying the burden for this crisis. A study done in May of this year found that 30% of children are going to bed on empty stomachs at night because the families cannot afford to feed them enough. And 66% of families are borrowing money or going into debt just to buy food for their families. And now schools are starting. Yesterday, a number of schools across Lebanon opened their doors again for the first time since the pandemic. And it's very important for them to be on campus because remote learning is extremely challenging in Lebanon. Most areas are getting a maximum of 1 to 2 hours of electricity. Gasoline has just gone, the prices have gone way up, so it's harder to run private generators, etc. So this is some statistics about the situation in Lebanon. So I'd like to start with some questions directed both at you, Rasha, and Michelle, as education experts, people that are working on the ground with children and families in North Lebanon. What do you see are some of the major concerns that children are facing in Lebanon today?
As you said, I think what you said summed it up pretty well. The situation in Lebanon is really hard. It's really difficult at the moment. We're hit with a multi-layered crisis, and the education sector is facing a lot of problems as well. Families that have children in schools are facing difficulties paying school fees. They're facing difficulties paying exorbitant prices for transportation in school buses, and even the price of fuel for their private cars has gone way up. We are facing a fuel shortage that is affecting the ease of transportation around the country. The financial difficulties that people are facing in general are leading to the inability to purchase essential things like school supplies, books, uniforms, things like that. And as you mentioned, if we want to revert back to online learning, it's practically impossible at this point.
So Michelle, I think as a school director, can you talk a bit about all of those issues and like how they're affected? What percentage of the students are they affecting at your school? And how is that, really affecting their ability to come to school and start learning again after all these time out of school?
Well, actually, whatever Rasha just came to say is actually a very clear and precise description of the situation overall. I would like to add one more thing that that is actually very important, and we believe that we're going to be facing it, which is not on the financial or monetary part. It's rather on the emotional and psychological part of the students, where after 2 years of actually disconnection from the school, from the physical attendance, mainly due to the pandemic over the last 2 years, we didn't yet start. So actually, today was our first day in the school for the secondary school, for the secondary students. However, we know that we are going to face a major issue with the psychological and emotional aspects of the students because of this disconnection from the school. Now, this is something very important, and as you might all be aware, the students, they actually, although they might be small in age, but they will definitely feel and sense whatever their parents are going through in their houses. And now there's, I think, not even a single house in Lebanon that is not facing, or let me say 99% of the households in Lebanon are facing a problem, a financial problem, and due to, of course, to the devaluation that you've spoken about. And this situation is definitely translated into the parents and, of course, their kids that are living with them in the house. So this is, we know that we're going to face this problem, aside of what all the things that Rasha has mentioned. Now, definitely, since August, we've been meeting with the parents before we kick off with the school, and I can say easily that I've met over 100 or 150 families so far out of 600 that we have in the school, and the common thing is the financial difficulties that we're facing. I'm not going to repeat the transportation, the tuitions, the uniforms. All these things are common, and not a single parent is not facing these things.
Are you witnessing parents that are removing their children from school because they can't afford it anymore?
Yeah, of course. And now there is one thing that is to be noted, that believe it or not, the main reason so far from all the withdrawals from the school, which is a good number, I would say, is mainly the transportation. So it's not actually the tuition, which has been increased a little bit slightly from last year, just to cope with the increase in the operational expenses. Unfortunately, the salaries of the teachers will not be raised at least unless an official decree from the government or from the House of Parliament is issued, because the students in the private school, they follow this law. But the operational cost from diesel to cleaning materials to insurance to all other things has been like multiplied by 10 easily, and this is the main reason. So I would say confidently that all the departures from the school, the families that left already, and we know that they have left because they've requested the certificates of accomplishment of the previous year, are leaving because of the transportation, where the transportation cost will be sometimes at least equal to the tuition, and then if they are living in a rural area, it would be more than the tuition itself.
So I wonder if you can explain a bit for our viewers from outside of Lebanon. In many other countries in the West, children just go to the school that's closest to them. So or transportation is provided by the school themselves, school buses. Why is that not the case in Lebanon? Why do these children need to have transportation provided to schools?
Actually, our school in specific, it's we can call it as a community school. So out of 1,000 students that we have at least 300 to 400 students that comes walking on foot. However, we do have others that lives in Tripoli, which is like 5 minutes or 10 minutes drive from the school. So it's relatively a nearby area. And we have also a minority, I would say maybe 10 to 15% that lives outside Tripoli and MENA. These people, they come. Now, you would ask me why they have chosen this school and not another school closer to their house. Well, for many reasons. The main reason would be that they believe in this school and its system and the way that things are going in the school. Our school, for instance, is a school that has been established in the year 1900. So it's 121 years old. And majority of the people who are enrolled in the school, their parents would have been students in the school, and their parents, their grandparents, if you want to say, are also students who were taught in the school. So, in addition, of course, to their satisfaction from the education quality that we're providing. Now, with the situation now, they are forced to choose between paying double the tuition, I mean tuition plus transportation, or just paying tuition, which is by itself is already a burden on them, noting that the salaries of the vast majority of the Lebanese have not increased, actually, except for people who work for big organizations, whether private or NGOs. All the rest of the people are suffering from the same thing.
And Rasha, with your interaction with families on a larger scale across Tripoli and MENA, do you see this the same issue, that many of them require transportation to get to school, and that's a major burden on them financially?
Well, yes, of course. And as you know, there is no public transportation in Lebanon, so that's not an option. So people have to either rely on walking, or if they're within walking distance, or they have to rely on private cars or a taxi that are costing increasingly. The taxi fees are also increasing exponentially, and the buses are, as Mr. Katra said, the bus fees are just as heavy as the school fees. So what we're seeing here is that transportation is becoming really a big issue for people, and this is mainly what we're seeing in this area. Now, as you asked why people aren't reverting to public schools as in other countries. The public system, of course, a lot of families have no option today but to go to public schools because of the fees and the financial issues. However, the public schools in Lebanon are already overcrowded. The buildings are crumbling. Some of them are unsanitary. Some of them lack very much in equipment. They lack in proper modern tools for education. The education system that is used in public schools is sometimes very old compared to the private schools that are much more evolved. We also see a lot of violence in public schools due to the overcrowding and due to the teachers being under a lot of pressure. All of this also affects people's choice to go to private schools. And as I mentioned before, it's a really big problem that there aren't enough places in public schools for everybody. We are also accommodating refugee children and other children. So really the burden on public schools is already huge. And if children who are enrolled in private schools now want to transfer to public schools, we're going to see an increase in this problem, and it's going to become unmanageable.
Yes.
If I may add, if you allow me to add one more thing, which I don't know if you have mentioned it in your statistics, I did not pay attention, but 30% of the students in Lebanon goes to public school, whereas 70% of them go to private schools. And this is an indication, it's a very clear indication that we do not believe, we as Lebanese, we do not believe in the service provided by the public schools in Lebanon. Public schools, I'm sure officials would not be happy to hear what I'm saying, but the education level from the public schools, except for very few schools, few schools, are not good, especially in the elementary and in the primary part. So in the secondary, maybe in some areas, in some schools, but overall, the education level that a student get out of a public school is not good. So this is why people historically, I would say since the late 70s, early 80s, has shifted to the private school. Earlier to that, public schools were in a much better situation. It's the situation in Lebanon in general. Everything that is managed by the government, by the state itself, is not working properly.
Another thing that I want to talk about is just the long-term effects of this. I have lived in many countries and I've been in contact with a lot of Lebanese diaspora. What I've noticed over the years is that regardless of the crises that Lebanon has gone through, which are not little, right? We've had a civil war, we've had crisis after crisis, it seems. But what Lebanon stands out for me is the skilled and educated population. So most people speak French, English, and Arabic. This is why I'm able to run a social enterprise here. And we're seeing more and more people every day leaving the country. If they don't have the opportunities here, they can find them in France, in Australia, in the US, in Dubai. Do you think that this crisis now with education is going to have long-term effects on these children, on their families, on the communities you work in, and even our country in general?
Of course, Lebanon, I mean, historically, I think our most important asset has been the human capital and the education level of the people here. Whereas now, from now on, what we're seeing is a lost generation in every sense of the term. We've been, as you said, we've been through so many crises, but throughout these crises, the education level in Lebanon has been maintained somehow. And now what we're witnessing is a huge drop in the education level, whether it's because people are leaving, the teachers are leaving, schools no longer have the means to sustain the level that they're used to. What we're seeing, therefore, is a drop in education. We're seeing increased dropouts. And of course, we know the cost of leaving an entire generation without education. And so it's going to affect everything. From drug use in neighborhoods where we work to the future prospects of these children.
Well, I also agree on that. However, let me take the positive side and think this is why we're striving to keep on starting the academic year. We want to start no matter what the challenges are, no matter what the if you want, burdens are going to be, but we will start the academic year. We hope that we will be able to continue it until the end, facing all the challenges that we're having. But definitely, and even in the last 2 years, let me go back a little bit on the 2 years that went earlier, where for those who didn't know, last year we had a full online year. It was depending on the school. The success of that year was depending on the school. So in some schools it was the success, like in our school, but in other schools where there was no real preparation done, whether logistically or on the training of the teachers and the students and the parents, it was a failure. Now the year before that, we stopped the year by the end of February. So the school year was from October until February. During that 5 months as well, we had the start of the revolution, of the 17th October revolution, where we had a lot of interruption in the schools, especially in Tripoli and in Mina. So in other areas in Lebanon, the revolution lasted for 3-4 days, 1 week maybe. But then after that, schools resumed. Whereas in Mina and in Tripoli, we couldn't resume studying until after at least a month. And then even after that, it was on and off. And every time we opened the Thuwar, the revolutionists, they would come and try to close the school because they want us to close the school and participate in the revolution. So 2 years that are really, really challenging in the education in Tripoli and Mina, essentially. So that's why we insist on opening and on starting this academic year. Failing to do that will definitely lead to a problem in the coming years that we will not see now, we will see in the future.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought this up, because I think a lot of people outside of Lebanon wouldn't know this, that really, honestly, for the past 2 years, there's been little to no education for children because there was a revolution, and access from, for example, north of Tripoli into Tripoli was blocked for a good 3-4 months. I have, for example, a daughter who's going to be 5 in January. She should have started school 2 years ago. In those 2 years, she's gone to school actually physically maybe 2 months. So she really lost 2 years of education. And I guess I want to talk a bit more about the challenges of remote education from the perspective of internet, electricity, gas, and I think access to technology, digital literacy. I mean, if we're saying that transportation is so high, then why don't we just, move online? But that's not possible. So I would love if you could talk a bit more about why that is a huge challenge to go back to remote learning and how it's really not possible these days.
Well, as you mentioned, I mean, the public electricity from the government is hardly present. I mean, we're really living in the dark ages here. So we hardly get an hour or two of electricity depending on where you live. So we rely heavily. We used to rely on private generators, and now we rely mostly on private generators. However, private generators cannot work 24 hours a day, and also they need fuel, which is in short supply these days. We don't have access to fuel. It's being sold on the black market. Sometimes it's impossible to find. So the fact that we have no fuel means that we don't get private generators as often. So we get large power cuts in every home. I think every Lebanese person is facing these problems. We don't have electricity all the time. Depending on everybody's income, they can get more or less hours of power, but everybody is facing power outages, and everybody's power outages are at different times and different moments of the day. So that makes online practically impossible. And added to that is the fact that internet connection. I mean, we have no maintenance practically because the government is bankrupt. So the infrastructure is crumbling, and the internet connection is really bad. And there is also no maintenance, which means we have internet cuts. We have network cuts throughout the day as well. So I think it's practically impossible to have. We don't have the infrastructure to allow us to go back to online learning. And we're also facing a problem because people don't have the devices that are required, to carry out online learning. People aren't equipped. Mothers and fathers are sometimes, they don't know how to operate these devices. They're not very familiar with online tools, online formats. And this is why also it was really, really hard at the beginning. And I think it's still hard for a lot of people who are under-equipped and who don't have the familiarity needed to operate online.
So I think we've really gone into great depth about the crisis and how it's affecting school children. But what we haven't talked about is children with disabilities. And as far as I know, anecdotally, these children their level of vulnerability and suffering during this crisis is much higher than the average child. I know that, Michelle, you have a number of children with disabilities attending the National Orthodox College. Can you just tell us a bit more about their situations, how they're even more affected by these crises than your average student, and why it's even more important perhaps for them to get back to education?
Well, that's right. Our school is an inclusive school. We have actually not many students that are with disabilities. We have a couple who are on the wheelchair, who cannot walk because of a disease that they have since they were born. And we have another 2 or 3 actually totally blind students, and another 3 who have a very severe vision problem. So these students, especially the ones with the vision problem, had actually suffered a lot last year, especially with the online, where actually they can hear the sessions, if you want to say, but the learning and the teaching was much reliable on the screen itself. Whereas in the classroom, there are many things that can be done aside of just looking at the teacher and hearing him. Of course, I mean, there is the interaction with the students. There is a feel. There is the touch. There's the help from the teachers and from the students that they like to have last year. Whereas the other students who have a disability problem in terms of walking, for them, frankly, the online period last year was fine, was not a problem for them. Definitely. This group of students needs to go back to the school for the social and emotional part of their character, where they need to get integrated in the society with their friends, with their students, with their teachers, which is a very important part aside of the educational part and learning and the math and the science and the Arabic and all the stuff.
Absolutely. And I would assume that many of these families really require financial support, given the extra expenses they have related to tools, equipment, medication, etc. they need for these children.
Absolutely. I mean, as you rightly said, aside of a normal cost of living, these parents have the need for the medication, for the extra tools and everything that is connected to the situation of their kids. Yes, I totally agree.
I just want to add also here, sorry, on a side note, that a lot of the medications are unavailable also in Lebanon. So we're also having difficulty accessing the needed medications. So some of these kids, they don't have access anymore to their usual meds. So this is also a problem, and it's adding stress on these families in addition to the stress that everybody else is facing. So yeah, I think it would definitely be beneficial to shed a light on this issue.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that just goes back to that, you know, a lot of this burden is coming back to the child and to their mental well-being, and going back to school is important for their education, their future, but it's also important for them to have some stability, some place to see their friends, to forget about the, you know, number of issues they're facing on a regular basis, their families facing, and live some normalcy. So again, I want to thank you, Rasha and Michelle, for coming on today and shedding some, I think, important light on the situation in Lebanon and why the future of children in Lebanon is really at stake these days. And I'm happy to also announce that we are starting a campaign this week, My Education, My Future. The mission of this campaign is to bring some donations and much needed funding that will go directly to schools and to the most vulnerable children at schools. So Digital has partnered with a handful of schools and centers for children with disabilities across North Lebanon and Akkar. And we will be collecting donations that will be then given to the schools, again, to directly support the cost of tuition and books for some of the most vulnerable children. So I really invite anybody who's watching this webinar to please share it with your family and friends. Let them understand what's really happening in Lebanon these days. And if you'd like to make a donation, you can head over to our website for all the details. You can find the link in the bio. And I just, again, want to reiterate that these children need our support to get back to education for the sake of learning, for the sake of their mental well-being. And really, for as little as $500 for an entire year, $500 would cover the cost for one child to go back to school for an entire year, for the families also to have that burden taken off their shoulders. They have a lot of other things to worry about. So again, thank you so much for coming today. And I look forward to working together on this campaign to bring much needed aid to children in Lebanon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.